My name is Francis, and I'm 39 years old. Then there's Harris, 45, my partner in everything. Together, we were an unstoppable team, acing our studies, taking late-night walks at 3 a.m., and, of course, falling head over heels in love. Our college years were filled with a love story you might be familiar with, where endless study sessions gradually turned into something more. Harris was everything I'd ever dreamed of in a partner, showering me with affection and making me feel cherished at every turn. But, as with any good story, things took a twist. While I was eager to build a future together, Harris hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to talk about marriage, or even introduce me to his family. It was as if he were tethered to the ground, dodging any conversation about our future. I'd had enough of his avoidance, so I confronted him. What followed was a heated argument where I accused him of keeping secrets that threatened to tear us apart. It all came to a head one day as we sat in our living room, sipping tea. With the weight of silence between us, I had to ask, Harris, why are you so afraid of moving forward, of getting married, meeting your family? What are you hiding? He stammered, deflecting at first, but finally, he confessed. He had been keeping something huge from me. His parents had no idea he was in a relationship with a black woman from Canada. I was speechless. For years, and they still didn't know about us? How had Harris planned to keep this from me? What did this mean for our future? Harris looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. Francis, I know this isn't right, and I know it's unfair to you, he said, but my family, they have very strong cultural expectations. They want me to marry someone from our background, someone Arab. They don't know about us. They don't know about you. I felt my heart drop. For years and they don't even know who I am? I was 27 when we started dating. How is that possible, Harris? I'm sorry, they have rigid views, and frankly, some of them are prejudiced. I've been terrified to tell them, terrified of losing you, too. So you've been keeping me a secret because you're afraid of their reaction? I asked, my voice trembling. You're supposed to be with me, Harris. You're supposed to stand by me, even when it's hard, even when it means challenging their views. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you more than anything, but I couldn't bear the thought of putting you in that position, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was torn, struggling to process everything. I love you, too, but this changes everything. Marrying into a family with such rigid beliefs, I'm not sure I can do that. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Please don't give up on us, Harris pleaded, his face filled with desperation. I'll talk to them. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't lose you, Francis. I need time, I whispered. I need space to figure this out. I need to think about whether I can live with these cultural differences and whether I can trust you again after everything you've hidden from me. I understand, he said softly. I should have been honest from the start. I'll give you the time you need, but know that I'm ready to fight for us. I stood there, torn. On one hand, there was my love for Harris, strong and undeniable, but on the other, the reality of joining a family with such inflexible views weighed on me heavily. The secrecy had fractured the foundation we had built. Trust and honesty are the bedrock of any relationship, and now ours felt unstable. I needed space to reflect on everything. Those weeks apart were the hardest of my life. I spent them lost in thought, questioning whether love could truly overcome such insurmountable challenges. During that time, I felt a deep sadness wash over me, but, even in the darkest moments, I knew Harris was the one, my soulmate. The thought of a life without him was unimaginable. Driven by a love that felt both foolish and undeniable, I found my way back to Harris, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. After reconciling, we tried to come up with a plan to navigate our complicated situation, but every option seemed to be clouded by fear and uncertainty. Eventually, Harris and I made a choice that defied convention. We decided to marry in secret, keeping it hidden from his parents. For Harris, this was his way of proving his commitment to me. Despite the deep fears he harbored about his family's reaction, he crafted a story about finding a suitable girl from a good Turkish family, conveniently leaving out the fact that I was black, and more importantly, that we were already married. Our plan was to live in secret marital bliss for a year before finally revealing the truth to his parents in Turkey, hoping for a fairy tale ending. If they rejected us, Harris promised to stand by me, no matter the cost to his reputation. You might wonder how I could agree to such a plan. The truth is, Harris had a way of making everything seem possible, and my overwhelming love for him probably clouded my judgment. Time passed quickly as we lost ourselves in the joy of being together. Our first year of marriage felt like a whirlwind, filled with laughter, love, and unspoken promises. Harris made sure to remind me every day how much he cherished me, pledging that he would always choose me, above everything else. But as we entered our second year, doubts began to creep in. I started to wonder when we would finally make the trip to Turkey. Every time the subject came up, Harris seemed to avoid it, his anxiety visible in the way he shifted his gaze or changed the topic. He insisted we needed more time, believing that a longer marriage would prove our commitment to his parents. In truth, we were both so caught up in the happiness of our life together that we kept postponing the inevitable. Though our love only grew stronger, the shadow of the future hung over us. The thought of facing Harris's parents and their potential rejection filled me with dread, but despite my growing concerns, I agreed to delay the trip for another year, holding on to the hope that maybe Harris was right, that with more time, things would somehow work out. So, we continued our life, blissfully in love, savoring every moment together. All the while, I mentally prepared for the journey ahead, wanting to bridge the cultural gap. I decided to learn Arabic, hoping to make a positive impression on Harris's traditional family. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into it. Hours were spent poring over textbooks, listening to language podcasts, and practicing with Harris whenever I could. My goal wasn't just fluency, it was to show that I respected his heritage and that I was willing to embrace his world. By the end of our second year of marriage, I had become nearly fluent. I hoped this effort would be proof enough of my dedication and my readiness to meet his family. Yet, despite all my work and growing anticipation, with gentle nudging from both sides, we finally began planning our trip. A month of meticulous preparations later, we were on our way to Turkey, ready to face the inevitable meeting with Harris's family. The journey was a whirlwind of emotions. The thought of finally meeting them after years of waiting, and of sharing our lives openly, filled me with both excitement and anxiety. As we landed in Turkey, I held on to a mix of hope and trepidation, unsure of what awaited us. We arrived at Harris's family home under the cover of night, hoping the late hour would soften the intensity of the moment. But when we finally disclosed that I was not only black but also Harris's wife, the atmosphere shifted instantly. His parents' reaction was swift and fierce. Disappointment and anger crackled in the air as they reprimanded Harris for his choice. Harris tried to defend me, but his words were drowned out by the storm of their disapproval. In a last-ditch attempt to bridge the gap, I spoke in Arabic, hoping to show my respect for their culture and my commitment to Harris. But instead of easing the tension, my words were seen as defiant. Aya and Khalid's disdain was palpable, their harsh words cutting deep. The racial slurs they directed at me left me in tears, but I stood my ground, determined to remain strong. I had hoped that Harris would stand by me in that moment, reaffirming the commitments he had made in private, but in the face of his family's anger, he seemed more focused on appeasing them than on defending our relationship. It was a crushing realization. He was prioritizing peace with his family over our love, leaving me feeling isolated and unsupported in a battle I thought we were fighting together. After the confrontation, we retreated to a hotel, our contingency plan for moments like this. The night was nothing like the celebration we had imagined. Instead, it was filled with heated discussions about Harris's lack of support. He admitted to being overwhelmed by the situation, arguing that my expectations had placed him in an impossible position, given his deep familial ties. Despite the tension and hurt, our bond was strong enough to guide us through the immediate storm. The following days in Turkey were a mix of leaning on each other and trying to make sense of the painful events. But as we returned to Canada, a new challenge emerged. Harris confessed that he couldn't sever ties with his parents, citing a desire for reconciliation and respect for their beliefs. This decision marked the beginning of a difficult period for our marriage. Though Harris reassured me of his commitment, the unresolved tension with his family loomed over us like a shadow. Our relationship continued, but the weight of his family's disapproval was a constant presence. As the years passed, I began to feel the strain. I longed for us to start a family, but the ongoing conflict with his parents made it hard to envision a future. I voiced my concerns to Harris, but his responses were always vague, filled with promises that never came to fruition. Each call from Aya and Khalid seemed to further distance us, as they pushed Harris to end our relationship or scolded him for tarnishing the family name. I tried to help him see that some relationships, especially those filled with toxicity, needed to be reevaluated, even cut off, but Harris still held on to the hope that reconciliation was possible, despite the growing divide between us and his parents. The frustration culminated on my 35th birthday, when I could no longer stand the emotional strain. I couldn't keep postponing our future, but Harris seemed stuck between his love for me and his desire to keep the peace with his family. His hurtful words, suggesting that our relationship wasn't worth sacrificing his ties to his family, stung more than I could bear. Though he seemed to regret his outburst, no apology followed. Feeling lost and dejected, I knew I needed space to think. I spent a night alone in a hotel, reflecting on everything, our relationship, the future, and the person I was becoming in the midst of all this turmoil. The hope that Harris would choose me over his family began to fade, and after weeks of reflection, I knew the truth. Our relationship could not survive under the weight of his family's disapproval and the constant uncertainty. With a heavy heart, I made the decision to file for divorce. I left the papers and my engagement ring in our shared home, the symbol of a promise that could no longer endure the strains we had faced. It was the hardest choice I had ever made, but I realized that moving forward required letting go of the hope for a resolution that might never come. Harris's reaction to my decision was swift and intense. He bombarded my phone with messages, pleading for us to reconcile and vowing that things would change. But I stood firm, choosing to handle the matter through legal channels to protect my emotional well-being. It was a decisive step forward, marking the end of a painful chapter in my life and the beginning of a journey toward healing and rediscovering my independence, free from the turbulence and heartbreak that had come to define our relationship. I couldn't bring myself to face Harris again. The hurt he had caused ran too deep. His apologies and attempts to fix things fell on deaf ears, as nothing could make me reconsider. Surprisingly, the divorce process was smoother than I anticipated. Harris, perhaps still clinging to the hope of reconciliation, believed our separation was only temporary and that I would eventually return to him. But as the year passed, it became painfully clear to him that my intentions were far more serious than he'd imagined, and the permanence of our split began to sink in. By then, it was too late. The emotional wounds he had inflicted were too deep to heal. The next 3 years, however, were a period of personal transformation. At 39, I was truly living for myself, embracing new relationships and savoring the happiness I had longed for. This time was about building a life free from the shadows of my past. But just as I was settling into this newfound peace, my world was shaken again. My inbox began to overflow with mysterious emails from unfamiliar senders. At first, I ignored. He stunned me further by revealing a shocking truth. His parents still thought we were married. I had assumed they would be relieved by our separation, but it turned out Harris was too embarrassed to admit he was the one left behind. To save face, he had concocted a lie, keeping up the appearance of our marriage to avoid the cultural shame of being divorced. And then, in an even more surprising move, Harris offered me money to continue pretending to be his wife for his parents, who, after years of silence, were supposedly warming up to me. They were planning a celebration in honor of our union, a notion that filled me with dread. Despite my deep reluctance and the growing realization that Harris had not changed, I agreed to his request. I knew I had to play my part in the charade, but I was also plotting my escape from the cycle of deception. The day of the celebration came, and Harris paid me in advance for my role. The event was surreal. Aya and Khalid, his parents, greeted me with unexpected warmth, far different from the cold reception I had once known. Their behavior felt disorienting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that evening, their true motives became clear. In a private moment, they dropped the act, revealing that their public display of acceptance was nothing more than a facade. Their disdain for me had not changed. If anything, it had deepened. Their words were as cruel as ever, and when the confrontation escalated, I braced myself for what seemed like an inevitable physical altercation. I stood my ground, ready to expose their bigotry if necessary, but Harris intervened in an attempt to calm the situation. Aya and Khalid, however, made their true feelings clear. They had only feigned acceptance in a desperate attempt to keep Harris in their lives, despite their objections to our marriage. This encounter was a painful reminder of the manipulations and power struggles that defined our relationship with his family, as well as the lengths they were willing to go to preserve appearances. And then, the unthinkable happened. Aya and Khalid made an audacious demand. They wanted me to pay off their mortgage in exchange for their acceptance into the family. This wasn't just a financial request, it was an insult. A crude transaction that reduced their approval to something that could be bought. It was the last straw. I refused to play along any longer. With a sense of finality, I revealed to them that Harris and I had been divorced for 6 years, and their opinion no longer mattered to me. The shock of the revelation was palpable, and the reaction from Harris's parents was swift. They turned their wrath on him for not disclosing our separation sooner, accusing him of bringing shame to the family. Harris tried desperately to salvage the situation, but it was too late. Aya and Khalid, humiliated and angry, stormed out of the celebration, vowing to sever all ties with him over what they saw as his betrayal. Watching Harris crumble under the weight of his own lies was a pivotal moment. For years, he had feared this very scenario, and now that it had come to pass, he was utterly defeated. Despite the threats he had made against me, I held the upper hand. I revealed my final card, a restraining order, making it clear that his intimidation tactics would no longer work. The look of disbelief on his face was enough to bring me a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. As I walked away from the chaos, I couldn't help but laugh, a laugh of liberation, of closing a painful chapter, and of reclaiming my life. It was a sound of freedom, of knowing I had finally broken free from the toxic web Harris and his family had woven around me.